Hey friends, my name is Alyssa. I want to share with you the books that I read in May. I had a great reading month. I read 4 books. 3 of them were 4 stars and 1 of them was 5 stars. 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction. Really enjoyed these books, so I want to share with you just a little bit about them. First, let's go with nonfiction. The Shortest Way Home by Pete Buttigieg was one of the first books that I read in May. Just for context, if you don't watch the news or are not from the United States or follow politics, you might not know that Pete Buttigieg is a presidential candidate. He's running in the primaries for the Democrat presidential nomination. For context, maybe if this is being watched in the future, it might be interesting to know that right now he's polling at like 3rd and 4th. Pete Buttigieg is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, which is a medium-sized town. I think it's about 100,000 people. He became mayor when he was 29. This town is in the heart of the Rust Belt. There used to be a lot of car manufacturing that was happening in South Bend and in surrounding areas, and that left, which meant the population has shrunk considerably compared to previous generations. There are a lot of abandoned homes, the economy is really struggling, that kind of thing. And he became the mayor, and the town has, to be a mayor that's running for president, you had to have been doing a really good job. The main focus of at least the second half of the book is very much his experience as mayor and like what he was doing, a lot of his techniques and tactics and objectives and how those were successful. But the book itself follows the chronology of his life. He grew up in South Bend, he went to Harvard, then he was a Rhodes Scholar to Oxford, he worked for McKinley, he was in the military, and then he is now married to his husband, has a bit about like coming out as gay there as well. That's sort of the chronology of the book, and it felt very much like the purpose of this book, and it makes sense, was to introduce himself to the world so that during his candidacy people could pick up this book and know who he is. And I feel like the book does a good job of that. It was also very entertaining. Not that it was exceptional in any way or that it has like great literary merit, but I found myself looking forward to the next time I could pick it up. It was really enjoyable to read. It was very accessible, easy reading. He has a very interesting story. It's not a big focus. There's just a little bit about it, like them meeting in their first few dates, but I loved the romance of he and his husband. It was really cute to me. A really very minor part of the book, but that was something I really enjoyed. After reading this book, I would say that Pete Buttigieg has a very analytical mind, but is very motivated by emotion as well. He feels very balanced in sort of logic to emotion. I don't know if that makes sense, but that just sort of what came across in in the book. A lot of his tactics as mayor are motivated by data, but he also feels very connected to the idea of needing to be in touch and what his role as a mayor is in terms of being a leader and comforting when there's disaster in his town or something like that, that it's not just about like political strategies. It was also about like the figurehead that he needed to fill, and the leadership and service capacities that come with that. I don't know if this is making sense, but I came away, I'm like not gonna make this political and like share my ideas of him as a candidate, but I think he's a really cool person and has a very interesting story, and it was fun to read his book. I give it 4 stars and would recommend it if you're mildly interested in him or want to familiarize yourself with the presidential candidates for 2020, the US presidential candidates for 2020. The second nonfiction book that I read in May was Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption by Bryan Stevenson. This is a book about the justice system in the United States, more specifically, the problems with the justice system in the United States. Bryan Stevenson was a very well-trained and accomplished lawyer, and he went down to, I think it was Alabama. I read this like a month ago. I really think it was Alabama. And he started a nonprofit where he was helping people on death row to get off of death row. There are a lot of stories in this book that are very harrowing. Most of the issues really come from systemic racism that has built its way into our laws and structures and process. And even when those things aren't racist, the judges or the lawyers or the juries that are interpreting them and sentencing them and enforcing these laws are operating within a culture that still has too much racism in it. That means that there are problems that in many ways I think that I thought and that I think that many people think are issues that we don't still have. Like, this shouldn't still be a problem in 2019, like we're past this. But the reality is that we're not, or in a lot of places we're not. You got several stories, individuals that you followed chronologically, heard their stories, their case, and there are moments of redemption where you felt like victory and success, and there were others where you felt like, how is this still happening? It's gut-wrenching. I definitely recommend it if you want to be a bit more informed. This is a very uncomfortable book to read, but also a very informative one, and one that I felt was important for me to read to be an informed citizen. I wanted to make sure that I was more informed about what some of these issues were, and that I wasn't just sweeping it under the rug because that's more comfortable to do. One criticism that I have of this book is that it was published in 2014, but there were stories that were happening as early as the early 90s. And yet there are not always a lot of dates, and something horrifically unjust would happen, and I didn't know if this happened 5 years ago or if this happened 20 years ago, and it wasn't always clear whether or not laws had changed and this is something that could still happen or not. So his lack of dates sometimes was a little bit confusing to me about like the reality of where we stand on this issue right now. Okay, on a happier note, I also read in May The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This was a really fun book, and I found it so entertaining, which is exactly what I wanted out of it. It feels very much like a Downton Abbey 1930s or 40s murder mystery party in a way. The plot is about a character who finds himself waking up with no memory of anything before this moment, and he is at a dinner party and quickly learns that he is reliving the same day in different host bodies with different identities, trying to solve the mystery of Evelyn Hardcastle, and that for him to escape this situation, he has to solve the mystery. I found this book really entertaining and was both surprised and very pleased with how not predictable it was. I was certainly like couldn't guess who did it and like how the whole thing worked, and the entire setup and premise of the book was really entertaining. One thought that I had on this book, and I don't know if this really makes a lot of sense, but it's this day being relived over and over again, meant that it created this effect that the plot, instead of being this linear plot that you're following, it felt more like you were examining like a tapestry of plot, and sometimes we're getting a little bit here and then back again. I don't know if that makes sense. That's just sort of the way that I can kind of visualize it. I don't think I'd read a book that sort of came across that way to me before, that sort of interwovenness, but I really enjoyed it. It felt very well developed and executed. I gave it 4 stars because it was really enjoyable, but I don't think it captivated me as much as I expected, though I know this is a really popular book, and it's definitely worth the read. It was very entertaining. The second fiction book and the last one in this video is The War I Finally Won by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. This is the second book in, it's a sequel to The War That Saved My Life. And that is the first book that I read this year, and I gave it 5 stars. This book I also gave it 5 stars. It is a middle grade book, and the first book is about Ava and her brother Jamie. Ava's about 11, and they live in London just at the beginning of World War II. Ava has a club foot, which means her foot is like twisted, so she kind of walks on the side, and her mother is very neglectful and abusive and never gives her medical attention. She's never allowed to leave her home. Jamie then comes home and says that all of the children are being evacuated to the countryside because anticipated that there will be bombing in London, and Ava seizes this opportunity to make it out into the countryside where they're given a new home to live in, and they sort of escape their neglecting mother through this event. That's what the first book is about, and I don't want to give too much away by talking about the second book, but they continue living in the countryside in this book, and it's very much about really sort of a healing process. You know, Ava has her foot fixed at the beginning of the book and has this process of going through the physical healing process of this, but also the emotional healing process of accepting the fact that all of the pain emotionally and physically that she went through only happened because her mother was neglectful and didn't get her this same surgery when she was a baby. And that now she can't really do anything about that. She just has to accept it. But also, there's really grappling conversations as well about levels of accountability that we should hold others to for their actions. In this book, one of the other characters suggests that her mother was incapacitated and leaves Ava with this struggle that she wants to be mad at her mom for neglecting her, but also that she maybe can't, like, maybe it's what she wants to be her mom's fault isn't exactly her mom's fault. And that's a reality of our life. Sometimes bad things happen and it's kind of no one's fault. It's just something we have to accept. And I feel like it's done really, really well. Another vein of this idea in the book is that there are some German, Jewish German refugees in this town, in this book. And as this is the middle of World War II, from her child perspective, they are the enemy. They are the causing of all of this, like, suffering during World War II that this family's going through, or these people are going through. And yet in time she realizes that also, you know, one of these girls is a victim of something that's outside of her control. It wasn't her choice to be German. It wasn't her choice to be born Jewish. And it isn't her fault that Hitler started this war. Like, she is a victim of this war just as much as the English people are. And being able to, so there's sort of this idea of, like, identifying with the other and, like, holding people responsible for their actions and not the qualities about themselves or the things that happen to them that they can't control. It's a beautiful book. I think it's simple, and I think its objectives are really simple, but it executes it with really clear, true messages that just ring true, and also an emotional tone that is very mature but extremely accessible to a young audience. I really enjoyed it as an adult. I think it would be really meaningful for a middle grade audience to read as well. I love this series. I've talked about the first one and how much I loved it, so I'm just really glad I happened to come across this series. I think it's a really beautiful one. So those are the 4 books that I read. My goodness, for only 4 books, I managed to still make a really long video. I really enjoyed them all. They were great, and there were a lot of things to talk about. I hope that maybe one of these 4 books has sparked your interest. If you've read any of them or are interested in reading them, let me know down below. I would love to chat with you there. I hope you guys are having a wonderful summer, or whatever season it is, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you in a future video. Bye!